All right, hello fifth graders. How are you? It's a new week. This is the assignment for Monday and Tuesday, the 27th and 28th of April. Today we are going to learn about the hierarchy of shapes of four-sided figures, and that's what your worksheet is going to be about. Um, it might be a little confusing when you read the worksheet, but if you think about it carefully and follow these rules that we're going to go over, you'll have no problem with it. Also, something that might be helpful is Thursday and Friday's worksheet, which has all the definitions of the shapes. Those are something that you might want to have by your side when you do these also. But we're going to go over this. Basically, what we're talking about is the hierarchy of four-sided shapes, and it starts with quadrilaterals. So, in other words, quadrilaterals means any shape with four sides. And what that means in the hierarchy is that all of these other shapes are also considered quadrilaterals. So if I say to you, is a square a quadrilateral? Well, the definition is, does it have four sides? Yes, it does. So that means a square is a quadrilateral. If I say, is a parallelogram a quadrilateral? Yes, it has four sides. Is a kite, is a trapezoid. Any of these are quadrilaterals because the definition of a quadrilateral is it just has to have four sides. So all of these figures are quadrilaterals. Okay, the next one is a trapezoid. The trapezoid, the only rule to the trapezoid is it has to have one set of parallel sides. Okay, so that means any of these other shapes that have at least one set of parallel sides is a trapezoid. So if I say to you, is a square a trapezoid? Well, we look at the definition, it's got two parallel sides, and you only have to have one of them, so that means it does. So a square is a trapezoid, okay, because it has at least one set of parallel sides. Everything below the trapezoid, except for the kite, which we're going to get to in a second, is a trapezoid. So a square is a trapezoid, rhombus is a trapezoid, rectangles are trapezoids, parallelograms are trapezoids. All right. The next one in the order is a parallelogram. The rule for parallelograms, it has to have two sets of parallel sides. That's the only rule. Okay. So that means any of these other shapes that have two parallel sides is considered a parallelogram. So if I say, is a rectangle a parallelogram? Well, it has two parallel sides, so yes, it's a parallelogram. Now, one thing I should mention is you can go backwards too. So in other words, a rectangle is a parallelogram, but if I say, is a parallelogram a rectangle? Well, now we have to say, well, what is the definition of a rectangle? A rectangle has two parallel sides and four right angles, okay? A parallelogram does not have to have four right angles, which means a parallelogram is not a rectangle, okay? Same thing with quadrilaterals. I can't say is a quadrilateral and then name any of these shapes. Is a quadrilateral, right? Is a quadrilateral a kite? Well, no, because the kite has to have two sets of sides the same length. So you can't go backwards. If I say, is a trapezoid a square? Well, no, the definition of a square is it has to have two parallel sides. All four sides have to be the same length, and it has to have four right angles. Well, that's not a trapezoid, okay? Trapezoid just has one set of parallel lines. So a trapezoid is not a square, but a square is a trapezoid, okay? So each one of these, except for the kite, we're gonna kind of do this here. Each one of these shapes is the shape below it, but you can't go backwards. So in other words, a rectangle is a rhombus, but a rhombus is not a rectangle. All right, so let's continue. We did parallelograms. Rectangles. Rectangles, the definition is it has to have two parallel sides and it has to have four right angles, right? Rectangles look like this, right? They're right angles. So that means anything that is the definition of four right angles can be considered a rectangle. So if I say, is a square or a diamond a rectangle? Well, two parallel sides all have to have the same length and four right angles. It has the two things that makes it a rectangle. So a square or a diamond is a rectangle. But a rectangle is not a square, because a square, all four sides have to be the same length, and that's not true of a rectangle. So hopefully this is not getting confusing. Now there's two exceptions to this rule, okay? One is the rhombus. The definition of a rhombus is it has to have two parallel sides and all four sides have to be the same length. If you remember, a rhombus kind of looks like this, where each of the sides are the same length, right? And all the sides are parallel to each other. So that's a rhombus. A rhombus is different from a square because a square has to have four right angles. So that means a square can be a rhombus, right? Because it has all the characteristics of a rhombus. In other words, in a square, you have two sets of parallel sides and you have all the sides that are the same length. So a square is a rhombus, but a rhombus is not a square because there's no right angles in a rhombus. A rectangle and a rhombus, here's where it gets a little tricky, all right? A rectangle and a rhombus are not compatible either way. And the reason is because even though they both have two parallel sides, the other thing that makes them the shape that they are is different. So in other words, if I say, is a rhombus a rectangle? Well, I have to look at the definition of a rectangle, two parallel sides and four right angles. Well, the rhombus doesn't have four right angles, so that means the rhombus is not a rectangle. And if I say, is a rectangle a rhombus? Well, we have to look at the definition of a rhombus, two parallel sides, all four sides are the same length. Well, a rectangle, all four sides aren't the same length. So that means a rectangle is not a rhombus, and a rhombus is not a rectangle. Okay? And then the last one where there's an exception is the kite. And the kite, remember, kind of looks like this, if you can see it. Right? So the kite, the definition of a kite is it's basically a quadrilateral, and the only rule is it has two sets of sides that are the same length. So these sets of sides are the same length, and these sets of sides are the same length. The unusual thing about a kite is it has a different rule than any of the other shapes. So none of these shapes except for none of these shapes are kites at all. So if you see a question that says, are any of these shapes a kite? The answer is false. The only thing that a kite is a quadrilateral. Okay, a kite is a quadrilateral because a quadrilateral, it just has to have four sides, and a kite has four sides. But a kite is not any of these other ones because there's no parallel sides, there's no right angles, none of that stuff. So that's the one other exception, is the kite. The kite is a quadrilateral, but it's not anything else. And none of these shapes are kites. That's the one unique one. Okay? This one, can be a little confusing, but I encourage you to either take a picture of this or use Friday's assignment, which might help you because that was the definitions, but just read them carefully. All the questions are things like, is a trapezoid a quadrilateral, which would be yes. Is a rhombus a trapezoid, which would be yes. So it's all dealing with this hierarchy. And then lastly, the video question today is let's see, actually I didn't even think of one, so now I gotta think of one. All right, what's the name of the city on my shirt in the video? All right, that is the video question today. What is the name of the city on Mr. Gold's shirt? All right, guys, hope you had a good weekend. I will see you in a couple days.